have put together.
Yeah, no problem. I wish I had the forethought to set some of this up. I probably would have. I've got all kinds of audio, video recording equipment. It's like when I sit down and do basic Zoom meetings and conversations, I've gotten
Yeah.
just accustomed to using the built-in internal mic on the laptop. And
Yeah.
golly, for podcasts, if you got the equipment, you might as well use it.
Right. Yeah. It doesn't surprise me you have the equipment. You're a media guy, aren't you?
Yeah, that's one of the hats I wear.
Right.
Depends on the day.
And it's not only a Glengarry. He also has a media hat and other stuff.
Yeah.
So, and you mentioned that you recently built like an office workshop shed in your backyard. Is that where you're talking to me from?
Yeah, yeah. It's my own little private auxiliary building. My wife refers to it as my outhouse.
Yeah.
But it's kind of a two-story outhouse, pretty
That's
large
awesome.
space.
I've got a similar, though probably smaller setup. We had when we bought the house, there was a pretty nice brick shed behind it, and but it was just a shed. So a couple years ago, I finished out a little more than half of it. So I also have a tiny little outhouse that I go to when I have work to do, or when I'm just feeling crabby and the family doesn't want to see me anymore.
Sure. Well, then I'd live out here probably all the time, they'd tell you. But it's nice to have an escape like that, for sure.
Yep. Yes, sir. Well, I want to know. I want to know everything, not only about Bigfoot and skinwalkers, but also about you and bagpipes and stuff. And so, let's start with biography and see where we go. Where were you born? How'd your parents meet? Back me way up. And how did you come into this world, sir?
How did I come into this world?
Well, okay, hang on a sec. I should be more careful with my questions here.
Right? And this is a family-friendly...
It is a family-friendly podcast.
Podcast. Yeah. No, yeah, happy to give you the background. It's funny with the, bagpipes, Bigfoot, all that fun stuff.
Yeah.
I guess I've developed a bit of a reputation. Maybe that's a bad thing. I don't know.
No, not any no press is bad press. So how did this madness get started?
Well, probably got started because my mother, her side of the family comes from Payson, Utah.
Hey, me too.
Yeah, down that neck of the woods.
Mm-hmm.
So and I mean just as a toddler,
Mm-hmm.
I was attracted to the sound of the bagpipes.
Yeah.
You have the Payson Scottish Festival, obviously, down there, but there were the Onion Days Parade and all those fun little local festivals.
My family members always make fun of us that we have Onion Days. They all have like Strawberry Days or like Watermelon Days, for their summer festival. Payson has Onion Days.
It has Onion Days, but hey, Payson's got some of the most incredible community activities, like the Payson Salmon Supper.
The Salmon Supper, absolutely, yeah.
There are very few festivals that I would miss in the state of Utah. Well, sorry, take that back. There are a number of festivals I could miss in the state of Utah, but there are
Right.
very few that I refuse to miss.
Yeah.
And one of those is the Salmon Supper.
Yeah.
Just nothing like having what essentially is a town picnic. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
everybody comes out, participates. You have the football team is helping bus tables. You got the cheerleaders out there. You got the fire department's over there cooking. They close down that street and they bring in all the clippings from the orchards, all the fruit wood, which they use to light these massive bonfires, and then
Yep.
they put these. They fly in. I think what was it last year? They flew in 5,000 pounds of salmon out of
Yeah.
Alaska that they put out on these what essentially are stretchers that the fire department rotates on over those coals, and then they carry those things up to the serving station, and
Yeah.
it's incredible. And you sit down and everybody gets corn on the cob and the rolls and what essentially is half a fillet of salmon on their plate, and you sit down at these massive tables that are just packed into the park, and it's
a beautiful park too.
hundreds of people.
Huge old trees, so lots of shade
Oh, yeah.
and stuff.
Yeah, it brings a sense of community and small town Americana that it's disappearing.
Yeah, it
in,
feels like a
our
holdout,
modern
doesn't
age.
it?
Yeah. And so I cherish opportunities to go back there because that is, of course, my roots. That's where my family came from. I used to, during Easter, run around and do the Easter egg hunt in that
Yeah.
same park.
Yeah.
And so I got a lot of fond memories going back there. But one of the earliest ones, of course, was hearing those pipes.
Yeah.
And just as a toddler, I was drawn to that sound. It just stirred something in my soul.
Yeah.
And I knew I had to get closer to that. I had to touch it. I had to be a part of that. And so those are my earliest recollections and memories. And as I started to grow up, my parents, my father is from a small town in southern Utah, Milford. Don't know if you're familiar with that place, but it's south of Delta or west of Beaver. So if you're
So either you go to the middle of nowhere and then head south, or you go to the middle of nowhere and then head west.
Head west, yeah. So out there at the crossroads of nowhere and beyond nowhere.
Yeah.
Is a little railroad town called Milford.
Yeah.
And that's where my dad's from. My mother's from Payson. They ended up.
For your parents, your mom's the city girl.
Yeah.
By comparison.
In comparison.
Right? Yeah.
Absolutely. Although you couldn't find a woman more country at heart. I mean, she'd come home from school. They're petite, neat, and all that fun stuff. She'd come home, she'd saddle up her horse, and she'd go riding up the canyon. My grandfather had a little bit of a farm and orchard there, and they had horses, raised rabbits and other things. And she'd come home, and she had a little Springer Spaniel. She'd put the saddle on the horse, and she'd go right up Payson Canyon there.
Yeah.
Come back at dark, do some homework, and she was the city girl in the equation here, but certainly
it's all relative.
Yeah. Well, her dad actually was he was the Wyoming rodeo champ a couple years running. He was a true cowboy. He ended up being a rodeo clown later in life. And, yeah, so I've got those cowboy rodeo roots in my
I'm
my
thinking
blood too.
like a rodeo clown in the bloodline makes sense to me with the some of the cool and crazy interests.
Yeah, I guess that is appropriate. But anyway, they met, married, had me. I was born in Provo and raised for a few years there in Payson, where my younger brother was born.
What part of Payson were you growing up in? Like, I mean, it's all Payson, right? But I grew up over by the cemetery, so I like to, build a map in my head.
Sure. I would have been a little further east and then south of there. So they ended up, they had the old house, and then they moved into a house where my aunt and uncle still currently live, and it's just on that street east of Petite Neat High, the same one that you can drive up to the canyon.
Yeah.
And they have a home probably, 2 or 3 blocks south of Petite Neat High there.
Gotcha.
And so, yeah, it was that kind of area that I ran around in back in the day, and now everything's developed and continuing to develop there. But
yeah, it's surprising to go down there now, isn't it? It's that whole commercial section that used to only be orchards and grass, the turf farm out there.
Yep.
It's all commercial stuff now. It's funny how that stuff happens.
All changed, yeah. So anyway, ended up moving up to Salt Lake. Graduated from BYU, and then ended up deciding.
What did you study? Because you do a lot of interesting things. So I wondered,
Oh, me? Well, I was talking about my dad there for half a second, giving you the foundations of where a lot of this stuff comes from for me. So my dad got his undergraduate at BYU.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
He served. Actually, both my parents are of the LDS faith, and they served missions. My father to Hong Kong back in the 70s, and my mother to Tokyo, Japan.
Oh, really?
So, yeah. So they had these exotic foreign oriental missions.
Yeah.
So I was raised on stories of the adventures in the Orient. And
and a cowboy and a cowgirl in the Orient as well, like that's a strong like west to east culture shift there, huh?
Indeed.
Yeah.
So they come back, and that's kind of how they met. They were teaching at what was the mission home in Salt Lake.
And that was
working for the church.
Like training for missionaries about to go out, right?
Correct. Yep. And so they kind of met through that course of employment, and the rest is history. Fell in love, and along I came.
Yeah. My
dad, because of his language skills and connections over in Hong Kong and China, in 1978, the year I was born, Deng Xiaoping opened China up. So that before then, China was very closed. It was that communist country that was not letting anybody in and not letting commercial development, international investments, anything like that, take place. Well, that changed, and there was this revolution in the way they traded with the world and allowed the world to come in, and tourism opened up really for the first time. And my dad, because of those connections, ended up going into the travel business and was working for Morris Murdoch. And he actually was principal in leading some of the first tours into mainland China, kind of at the very beginning. And some years later, the government here deregulated the travel industry. And my dad went from making substantial money doing some of these tours to making what was pennies on the dollar.
Yeah.
And he realized he was not going to be able to really kind of support the family and have the future he'd hoped doing that. And from his young age, had long wanted to be a filmmaker. But he thought making movies and doing film was something you had to be born into, like royalty. And so it was a dream that was unattainable, unreachable.
Yeah, he wasn't born in Hollywood, so it's not even an option, right?
Nope. Milford, Utah, a little
Right.
stop on the Union Pacific Rail line between Salt Lake and Vegas. So being a filmmaker was just a dream. Well, when that happened, he and my mother, they were living here in Salt Lake, and he decided he was going to go back to school. And so he went and applied and was accepted into the film studies department at the University of Utah. He ended up getting a master's degree in film. And really kind of what turned him into that path was a company reached out to him while he was still working in the travel industry, taking tours into China. And it's nobody big, just George Lucas and Steven Spielberg. They were.
I think I've heard of these guys. Let me Google these guys real quick.
Yeah, so their production team, they had completed drafting a script for the second Indiana Jones film.
Oh yeah.
So after Raiders of the Lost Ark and all its popularity and the blockbuster that it was, they knew they were going to do a sequel. And they wrote a script that ended up taking Indiana Jones into China. And so they worked with my father in trying to get all the permissions and everything that was needed to go in. And things were going very, very well. But of course the Communist Party wanted to be painted in a good light. And as they reviewed the script and the plans for the film, they decided, this is not what we want. And kind of turned that opportunity to have that film in their country down. And so if you remember the second Indiana Jones film, it's Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom.
Yeah.
That very opening sequence, it takes place, I think it's the Obi-Wan Cafe. It's in this Chinese kind of cabaret room where the Chinese gangsters or mafia are sitting at the table, and they're going to poison Dr. Jones, and the gals up there singing and dancing in a red sequin dress. And then Short Round, the little Oriental kid, ends up helping save the day, and they hightail it out of there, and they end up on the plane. That plane ends up, of course, crashing in India, and then they get wrapped up in this whole story about the Temple of Doom and the Thuggee cult in India. Well, that was how the story had to shift, because the Chinese government kind of shut down what they had intended.
Yeah,
but that opening sequence is that last remnant of the original intention, the original storyline.
That's interesting to imagine how that movie would have been if they hadn't, had to both literally and in movie veer to India. I mean,
right?
It's still a great movie, but interesting to imagine what else would have happened instead.
Indeed. So anyway, that kind of opened and gave my dad some connections to film, and he realized maybe I could pursue that dream after all. Maybe it isn't so closed off and impossible. And so because of that, he ended up deciding after deregulation of the industry, he was going to go back to school. He was going to get a degree in film and pursue that passion.
I see.
And so he did. In fact, his master's thesis film went on to win a good number of awards around the world, and including the Academy Award for documentary that year. And so he really, I could go on, and I know we want to get on to other topics, but
this definitely feels relevant to what the things that you do today.
It is, because that was his passion, and I watched my father growing up, transform into this filmmaker and a storyteller. My dad is a wonderful storyteller. He taught screenwriting at the University of Utah for a good number of years. A number of his students' films went on to become blockbusters, and he's a very talented individual. And so that kind of set the pattern for probably my storytelling.
Yeah,
kind of where I get that from.
Yeah, yet another peg that makes a lot of sense. How this would echo into you and your experiences and the things that you do.
Yeah, it certainly molded me into who I am now. And so one of the hats I do wear, as we started mentioning, was film and video production. I learned at that young age that if you wanted to communicate with the masses, if you wanted to touch people emotionally, one of the most powerful mediums to do that with is film.
Yeah.
Because you're painting with light and motion, and you incorporate music and sound, and you just start to communicate to people on a visual, an emotional, and intellectual, an audio-based level that really kind of no other medium combines in that way.
Yeah, it kind of brings everything together, huh?
Yeah, so I knew if I wanted to touch people and communicate with large audiences, film was going to be the way to do that. And so I kind of have followed a little bit in that in those footsteps, and I actually work with my father, but kind of part-time. I divide time, and I could probably explain why, but I do film and video production with him. We have a film company, Paradigm Motion Picture Company. Right now we actually have a film that's out in the festival circuit. We spent the last, 5-6 years doing. It's called America Boxed In, and it deals with some real timely issues. The whole supply chain, globalization through containerization, the invention of the shipping container, the intermodal shipping container, and how that changed the world and turned us into kind of next door neighbors. Prior to that advent, again, now I'm going off down another road here.
Is the film is this film America Boxed In? Is it fairly dramatized, or is it really a documentary?
No, it's a documentary. Yeah. And it's got a lot of the talking heads and things like that. But it is a very important topic in film right now, because it deals with the meteoric rise of China and its state-sponsored, capitalism there in their communist framework, and it's dealing with a lot of the issues that we're faced with right now. A lot of things that are going on in the South China Sea, the whole supply chain issues, and now as we see some tensions rise in Russia against the Ukraine and their support, with China, and is right now we're in the midst of the 2022 Winter Olympics. You have a diplomatic boycott of the games by a number of countries, including our own, because of human rights violations that China's committing against the Uyghurs over there. And so there's a whole discussion we could have along those lines. But this film deals with a lot of those topics, and so it's doing very well in the film festival circuit. Yesterday we actually collected our 50th win. We're considered in the top 15 films in the film circuit right now, which of all the films that get entered into festivals, and I mean there are thousands that go into them, we've risen to the top in a lot of these festivals, and claimed 50 awards, primarily best feature documentary film, and so that's been taking place just in the last few months, and so that's kind of exciting for us right now, and it's neat to craft a film that is both timely, important to the geopolitical landscape and that social conversation, and to be able to connect and communicate with people and raise awareness. It's it's kind of neat. So
I'll make sure I'm sure there'll be several things to link to by the end of the conversation. I'll make sure there are links in the show notes to projects that you've worked on or are working on and stuff too. Now, sure. I know that you've done documentary style stuff before, because I have seen a little bit of your Pipes of War project. So do you feel like that's where you feel most comfortable and strongest, or have you also done dramatic work?
We've assisted in dramatic work. We get, we do some work for hire here and there, and so, as various productions come to Utah, we've had opportunity to assist, and I've shot B-roll for even like Dateline or Nightline for NBC and various things like that. And so there's opportunity to work in a lot of those different things. But our as far as our company is concerned, kind of our strength is producing documentary films. That's the one my dad got his Academy Award for was a film called Genbakushi, Killed by the Atomic Bomb. Genbakushi is Japanese, and it deals with the second atomic bomb that was dropped in Nagasaki. And my grandfather, he was from Milford, Utah. It kind of follows his journey. Of course, it tells the full, a little bit broader picture of the history of World War II, kind of what led up to that conflict and all. But it follows that personal journey of a farm boy in southern Utah, swept up in war after Pearl Harbor. Of course, they knew that they were going to be drafted, and he was going to go to war. And he was inducted into the Navy, and he was on one of the first 3 warships. It was a boxcar carrier, aircraft carrier, that went into Nagasaki Harbor after the bomb was dropped. I mean, they went in while the fires were still burning, and so it kind of follows his journey, his experience, because prior to my dad making that film, my grandfather never really talked about the sights, the sounds, the smells, the things he saw.
Oh, I can hardly. It's making the hair stand up on my neck just to even imagine the hellscape that he would have been welcomed by to come into the harbor that quickly after the bomb.
Right. So it explores that and the thought and. Again, we can go down to that tangent for a while and talk about all that.
Well, what is this show about if not tangents?
We'll kind of bring things back around.
They all weave together to create what is Ian Spencer Williams. So
I suppose. So here you're getting to know me on kind of a broad spectrum. But
and that's the idea, right? Because like people who have met you, who are going to be listening to this, have probably only ever met you wearing a kilt and holding your pipes on competition day. And so, I want to know some of this stuff about what else, what outside of the circle happens with you,
Well, and that's what's great about your program is that you get to know your neighbor a little bit better on when you go to these games, and certainly the piping community here, and it's interesting. I've been in the piping community in Utah for probably 32 years, I want to say now.
Yeah, how did that start? The connection to Payson and all, where, were you rebelling against your father and saying, I'm never going to make films, I'm going to play bagpipes instead, Well,
No, nothing like that. And going on that film tangent, I'll bring that back around and make it relevant here in a minute. But the idea of pipes, like I say, appealed to me from that very, very young age.
Yeah, you liked them.
I had to get close to them, loved them, wanted to be a part of it.
Yeah.
And so my family settled up here in the Salt Lake area while my dad attended and graduated from the University of Utah. But of course, we'd go down and visit family in Payson, so I would constantly be down there during the Highland Games, and as just a child, I'd watch the pipe bands. Well, I knew I wanted to be a piper, and the thing was, I didn't know. It was kind of like my dad wanting to be a filmmaker. You had to be born into it.
Yeah, out of reach. Yeah,
totally. It was a dream, but where am I ever going to find a piper or somebody to teach me anything like that?
Yeah.
And when I was probably 10 going on 11 years old, I happened upon a gentleman practicing pipes in a park near my house. And
up in Salt Lake now, right?
Up in Salt Lake, yep. Yeah. So he was just piping in this park, and I was with some friends. We were out messing around, and we went over to this park. There was a field nearby, and back then you could walk around with little bows and arrows and probably not cause too much concern.
Yeah. I'm trying to imagine a pack of kids doing that in Pioneer Park today. I don't know if you'd get away with it, but okay, yeah.
No, not going to get away with it these days, but that was 1980 something, and life was great. And
yeah.
you were riding your bike, and there was open space, and you didn't have to come home till the street lights came on at night. Yeah. And it a little bit of more freedom. So
these were the Stranger Things days.
These were the Stranger Things days.
Yeah.
And nothing stranger than a gentleman playing bagpipes in this park on the outskirts of the neighborhood.
Right.
And so I walked up to him, and I looked at him, and I said, "Hey, you're going to teach me how to play the bagpipes."
There you go.
And this guy, he chuckled, and he said, "You know what? If I had a nickel for every kid that told me I was going to teach him how to play the bagpipes.
Yeah.
I'd be a wealthy man. And you know what? He was probably right, because that guy, he was a school principal for a lot of years.
Oh, yeah.
And he used to lead the Halloween parade at the elementary school. He would lead that dressed in his kilt and playing the bagpipes. That principal was Don Baxter.
Oh, the Baxters! Look at that. I just talked to Bruce just a week or two ago. I don't know in what order these are going to release, and so
Sure.
it gets shuffled just a little bit. But once this episode releases, I will probably have not that long before released the interview with Bruce.
Well, it's funny. The Baxters have a connection to a lot of people here in the piping community in Salt Lake and in Utah in general.
Yeah.
Even listening to your episode with Larry Erdman.
Oh yeah.
Good old Larry.
Yeah.
It's funny, and there's a story with Larry too that involves my father.
I hope it's
Larry,
embarrassing. If it's embarrassing, you got to tell it.
I got to tell it?
Yeah.
No, I love Larry to death. In fact, this outbuilding that we were talking about, my kind of studio office space out here, Larry was the electrician that helped wire all this up.
Oh, really? What a great guy.
So, yeah, I love him to death. He was a Boy Scout, and he went and attended camp up at Camp Mapledale, which is up Payson Canyon.
Yeah, I've been up that camp when I was a kid as well, yeah.
Fun. My father, from Milford, he was a real big scouter, and he went on, back in the time BYU offered a survival course, and you would go on this literally like a 300-mile hike and learn to live off the land. A gentleman named Larry Dean Olson ran that program. And my father participated in that, and he was real keen on all the scouting, and he ended up being a counselor up there at Camp Mapledale. And Larry Erdman was a scout that when my father had arrived and they were highlighting things, stuck out in his mind, because my dad had just recently come back from survival, and these young kids heard the stories and knew what an achievement and accomplishment that was. And the funniest thing is, Larry, he holds those Kayleys.
Yeah.
I think he talked about that. And of course, if you haven't been invited, he'll invite you shortly to Kaylee, where everybody can come and do some of the social dances, the Scottish dances.
Yeah, he's got a tune book you can review before you get there and stuff. He's got it set up real nice.
Yeah, bring your small pipes, bring your timbales, bring anything, and you're welcome to sit and jam and play the music from those books. And it's a fun social time. My children love going to those Kayleys. And at a Kaylee probably 20 years ago now, well, no, even more than that, it's got to be 25 years or so. Jeez, I'm getting old. We went to attend to this and brought my brothers, and my dad came along, and they were sitting and they were chatting, and suddenly the revelation washed over both my dad and Larry that they had met at Camp Mapledale years and years before.
Right.
And at the camp, I don't know if you.
I mean, it would have had to have been decades before, right? Like really years and years and years before.
Yeah, when they were kids.
Yeah.
I mean, long before missions and marriage and children and careers. Yeah. These guys were up at camp, and that year my dad, somebody had found a very large rattlesnake, and my dad and another individual, killed that snake. And apparently that snake skin still hangs up at Camp Mapledale. I guess it's on one of the other walls that used to hang at the trading post.
Yeah, I was going to say, it's at the trading post. I saw it, yeah.
You've seen it?
I know the skin you mean, yeah.
So my dad killed that snake, and then they ended up serving it, cooked it up, and so the kids that were there at the time could sample some of that snake. And Larry Erdman was one of the guys that got a taste of that very snake.
Oh, this is too perfect. This is too beautiful. And I was just
small world.
Yeah, small world, man. And I was just talking with the Christmas episode this year. I was talking with Erin, who she's actually moved out of Utah now, but she started piping with Wasatch a few years ago, and her husband is what do you call him, a herpetologist. He studies snakes and lizards and stuff, and we were talking about the difference between being poisonous and venomous, that if you can eat it versus if it bites you, you'll get poisoned, And then
sure.
my buddy Jeremy, who has the Way Too Twag podcast of bagpipes and bagpipe history, he messaged me afterward. He's like, "You're ruining what I thought the West was. I thought in the West you served rattlesnake burgers at McDonald's and stuff." And I was like, No. Well, now it's been revealed. Yes, we eat a lot of rattlesnakes out in these parts.
Well, I could go on with more snake eating stories, but yeah, we won't. We'll get back on track.
That'll
here.
Be another episode.
Yeah, just to paint a picture of how small this world is.
Yeah, that's fun, though.
there's Larry eating, rattlesnake up at Camp Mapledale that you've seen the snake skin, and
Yeah.
that's how that all came about.
It was cool, man.
It was a pretty big snake, and so they've hung on to it all these years. Here we are,
Yeah.
decades later, and that snake skin still hangs up there at the lodge.
Cool.
Yeah. So anyway, back on track. Don Baxter, I approach him and tell him he's going to teach me how to play the bagpipes. He laughs and chuckles, and he kind of brushed me off because a lot of kids say, "Hey, I want to learn the bagpipes," and
Right.
they never
Sure.
do. They kind of peter out.
Yeah.
But I was persistent, and he actually didn't live too far from my house. Again, he just walked over to practice at the park, and I walked from my house to
Run
go to
around
that
with bows
park
and arrows or something.
Yeah, with bows and arrows, and,
Yeah.
and cause all kinds of mischief, and
Yeah.
ran into him. So on another occasion, I ran into him again,
Yeah.
and I persisted. He said, "Look, if you're really serious, I'll give you the name of a man who will teach you. I really don't do lessons, but here's a guy that will." And he gave me the name and phone number, and that was Dennis McMaster, who was the
sure.
pipe major of the
Yeah.
Salt Lake Scots at the time. So I called Dennis up and told him I was interested. He kind of told me what it was going to take and in the commitment level. And that Christmas, I'd been so interested and involved in pursuing this. My parents ended up giving me a practice chanter and a little starter book, a little set they bought at Edinburgh Castle, down
Sure, yeah.
Eric Rand, so
Yeah.
Main Street there. So I ended up with a practice chanter and a little workbook, and I started learning the fingerings and whatnot.
And your parents were all
reached out-
for it? They didn't have any misgivings about having a kid learn to play pipes?
Surprisingly, no.
Maybe they didn't know what they were getting
they-
into, huh?
Well, they had encouraged me to get into music,
Yeah.
and so I was playing the clarinet, I think, in fourth grade, and they'd come to the band concerts, and if you've been to those elementary school band concerts, you know how painful those
Yeah,
can
if
be.
you survived those, you can survive a kid learning on practice chanter.
Right? So
Yeah.
they were supportive in that, and yeah, I started taking me out to Dennis's house for lessons, and taking lessons once a week, and then eventually, probably within about the span of a year, maybe just a little less, I was on the pipes and practicing with the Salt Lake Scots, and been with that band ever since.
Yeah, and did you say you were, 10, 11 when you picked this up?
Yep. Yeah.
Man,
So-
you've been around with the Scots for a minute then, huh?
Like I say, about 32 years now.
That is
I'm in
pretty
my
darn
mid-40s,
cool.
and it's been fun. It's been good.
Yeah.
And part of it, I think, especially back then, there was this real air of not speaking to or being friends with other pipe bands.
Right, yes, this comes up a lot. Yeah, it used to be so much more tribal than
It
Yeah.
was, yeah, and that's the perfect word. It really was tribalism at its core. And what's so fascinating is we have so much in common, and to be so divided. And I get that there's that competition, and you're trying to
Sure.
compete, and you want the best, and you're trying to recruit the best and retain the best, and if somebody goes from one side to the other, there's that feeling of betrayal, or
Yep.
You're a traitor, and none of that needs to exist.
Right.
You
Like
know?
we need to get to where we can just compete on the green on the day. And
Absolutely.
other than that, we're all one big family.
And I think that's what's beautiful about like Larry Erdman's Kaylee Hour,
Yep.
where you get together with him with people from different bands, different walks of life, and you just have fun.
Yeah.
And I want to continue to promote and foster that kind of energy here in our community, in the pipe band community here in Utah. And I think your podcast is key to that.
Here's
getting to
hoping.
know one another. So I'm glad, and I'm honored to participate in it with you.
Well, thanks for coming on, man. But we're hardly getting started. Tell me what else,
We haven't scratched the surface. I'll give you several episodes worth of things.
Yeah.
But so I ended up in the band. If I kind of fast forward and do a condensed version of all of that, I ended up competing with the band. I went, and it's funny, you get involved in this, and I always warn people when they say, I want to learn how to play the bagpipes, or I'm thinking of joining the band.
Yeah.
It sounds like a fun hobby.
Yeah.
I have to correct them. It's more than a hobby.
Yeah.
If you treat it like a hobby, you're not really going to do very much or go very far with it. Being part of a pipe band, being part of this, it really does get in your blood, and it becomes a lifestyle.
Yeah, I wonder
You know,
if the bagpipes will even allow anyone to do it as a casual hobby. Like, it seems like even if you didn't want to, you can get sucked in a lot deeper than that.
absolutely.
Yeah,
The bagpipes, they have a magic. The
yeah.
sound just stirs something in the soul. And when we talk about the bagpipes in the context of it being a martial instrument, that military background and association, it was those pipes that led men onto the battlefield, prior to and up to World War One. It spoke to people, and it stirred them up to great heroic acts,
Mm.
and in a way that a tuba is not going to do. And so there's something about the pipes, and it's
I'm going to get a
interesting
lot
when
of hate mail from the crossover tuba
from
crowd that listen to this
right.
podcast.
No offense, tuba definitely has its place and its purpose, but yeah, you're just not charging the battlefield with the tuba or the sousaphone. It doesn't have that same effect,
Yeah.
and that I think is the difference. If you're treating it, and you can kind of hear it when people talk about being a piper. Those that are treating it casually, those that are kind of approaching it as a hobby, it's like, well, I play the bagpipes.
Mhm.
Those that are part of this, that it's become that lifestyle for them, they identify themselves as a piper.
Yeah,
I am a
yeah,
piper.
that's an interesting point. Yeah.
And in a way that most other people, unless you are a concert pianist or violinist, you identify. That's part of what defines you. That is
Yeah.
who you are. And when you talk to pipers, they generally will say, "Hey, I'm a piper.
Yeah.
I'm a drummer." It becomes part of what defines you as a person, and it becomes part of your identity. And you're proud to wear that kilt. Whether it's the Salt Lake Scots tartan, or that of Wasatch District, or Utah, or Garden Valley. Anybody, you wrap yourself in that clan tartan. It is your identity. That band tartan, it's your uniform, and you pick up that instrument and you go out and you compete with it, and you end up participating in a way in people's lives too, that I think helps solidify that identity as a piper. When you go out and help people mourn the loved ones lost at the graveside, when you celebrate the weddings, and those milestones in people's lives, when you participate in even in parades, that celebrate that patriotic air, you're participating in moments that really kind of help define who you are, and it solidifies that purpose as a piper in a way that a lot of other band instruments just don't do for people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh, that's beautiful. And it definitely resonates. I can see what you're saying. Absolutely. I've wondered before if part of it is the, like there's the intense community aspect of, at least competitive piping, of course, where, you're part of this group effort. It's not just you by yourself. And then I also wonder, is there a sort of like a bar for entry that's high enough, with the, the physical difficulty of getting the instrument to work, and the technical skills that are required, and the even the monetary cost of the instrument, that make it so that anybody who persists long enough is definitely going to be passionate about it. Like if you weren't passionate about it, it kind of like it like makes the pool of people doing it smaller, and really only the most intensely interested people are going to be in that pool. Does that make sense?
Oh, absolutely. I think you're right. It really does separate, the serious from the casual. It has a way of winnowing out those less dedicated and passionate about it. And sure, so that does lead, as you say, to those that make it being very committed, and that probably leads to that passion out on the competition field, and again that kind of tribalism
that's
that exists.
A good point. That might be one of the negative side effects of exactly the same thing. What an interesting point.
Might well be.
Now,
so anyway,
some of your projects, like the Pipes of War thing, as well as just some of just, I feel like I can hear it and feel it in the way you talk about it as well. Do you feel like your father's, your grandfather's military experience, and having that be part of your family lineage, has an effect on your approach to piping as well?
A little bit,
Yeah.
and actually, kind of what's interesting. Yes, what you're saying definitely true,
Mm.
and a part of it. But I think the the appreciation I have for the service my grandfather rendered our country in World War II really deepened through experience in researching pipers in war, and then ultimately in starting to move forward with our Pipes of War project, to go to the battlefields, the battle sites, and participate even just in some of the funerals here in our state of Utah, as we've recognized or mourned fallen soldiers that have come home in different memorial services as well. Whether you're piping for the anniversary of Pearl Harbor, or you're at the Veterans Cemetery on Memorial Day, and you have these individuals that come up to you that are veterans, and they're thanking you, and they're being moved by what you're doing. I remember a few years back I was out at the Veterans Cemetery there at Camp Williams.
Yeah.
And an individual came up, and he had received some traumatic injuries in a conflict over in the Middle East, and he came over to me, and on prosthetic legs and arm, and you're just for him to come up and be moved to tears by what I was doing, and to thank me, it was incredibly humbling. It was this gut punch that here's an individual I owe my freedom to, everything I enjoy, he went and paid for in such a physical and tangible way that I can see that, and it's left and forever changed his life. He paid that price for me. It was incredibly humbling and moving, and it helped me. Maybe I think I always tried to understand what my grandfather had done or others do in service, but in moments like that, you just it comes home in a very visceral and emotional way, where it's that gut punch that there are men that have stood up to provide us with the security, with the freedom, with our way of life, and it comes at a price, and one I haven't personally paid. Somebody else paid that debt for me, and I benefit from it. And so if I'm able to pipe and express my gratitude that way for him, it's the least I can do. And I can't think of a better way to use that talent than to honor those men and women. And so I think over the course of my piping career and the work I've done researching pipers of war, and again, playing for those kind of memorial services, you come to that understanding and appreciation. And so, yeah, when you ask that, question, does one lead to the other? I think, both have given me a deeper understanding of those who, serve in the military and what they go through, and again, why I pipe.
I see. Now, this feels like a natural spot for me to ask you to give me kind of maybe not a pitch, but an overview of, or a pitch, however you like, an overview of this Pipes and War project. The traveling that you've done, the documentaries you've worked on. What is the project? How did it take shape? What is it? What's happened with it so far? What's its future? That kind of stuff.
Okay. The really the way it kind of came about when I was learning how to play the pipes. Dennis, he wouldn't just teach me the fingering or the tunes. He had the presence of mind to share a little bit of the history of the pipes and people who played the pipes. And he had on his bookshelf a little volume called The Pipes of War. This book details, it's kind of the record of achievements of pipers during the Great War. It was published originally in 1920, so 2 years after the end of World War I. And in there it highlights all the different regiments, Scottish regiments, and their pipers, and kind of what they did, and it's the Roll of Honor, and there's some other little anthology type stories or histories that were compiled into this book. And in one section, some of the achievements, there's little paragraphs that highlight actions in which pipers were involved and what those pipers did. And I remember him reading one of those to me. It was the story of James Richardson. He was a 20-year-old piper out of Canada, born in Scotland, immigrated to Canada, went and fought in World War I, and was awarded the Victoria Cross, which is the highest medal for valor in the Commonwealth, kind of like our Medal of Honor here in the United States. It's their equivalent. And he's the only Canadian piper to have ever been awarded such an honor. In fact, there are only 3 pipers in all of history that have earned the Victoria Cross, and he was the youngest. So Dennis shared that story with me, and I don't know why it touched me. It connected. And maybe because he was young and I was young at the time.
Sure.
But there was just something about that story that sparked an interest and stuck with me. So much so that when in 2000, I want to say it was 2003, 2002, 2003 roughly, there was some chatter out there in the internet and in kind of a few of the piping circles about a set of bagpipes that had been discovered in a school display case in Scotland. It was in Crieff, Scotland, a private school called Ardrech. These bagpipes were battle damaged, covered in the mud and blood of the Somme. And the Somme, wow, for those that don't know, was a British military engagement in World War I, and it took place in 1916. July 1st, 1916 was the opening engagement, or opening salvo for the Battle of the Somme. It took place in the Somme River Valley in France along the Western Front, and to this day it is still considered the bloodiest day in British military history. 60,000 casualties occurred that day for the British forces, and nothing's compared to that since for them. And this James Richardson, participated in that. And when you say the Battle of the Somme, it wasn't a battle that just took place one day. It was an engagement in multiple battles that took place over a several-month period. The Battle of the Somme did not come to a close until probably November of that same year. And so from July to November, the Battle of the Somme raged in that area. These pipes were covered in the mud of that battle, and they were sitting in this display case. And what I'm trying to think of the best way to articulate some of this story, because there's so much information to share.
Yeah.
But and so forgive me if I start to trip up a little bit, because there's
no
so many things here to share about it. And I'm trying to do it kind of in that chronological way, because my research has given me so much more depth and understanding now. But at the time, there was some thought that these bagpipes might belong to James Richardson, and that further study may reveal that, and that was intriguing. Dennis at the time brought that to my attention, and I got excited. I'm going, oh wow, could they be these bagpipes that belong to this piper? 2003, an individual named Roger McGuire. He was the pipe major for the Canadian Scottish Regiment up in Victoria, British Columbia. He went over to Scotland to kind of verify and if these pipes belonged. And so I guess maybe the way to draw that connection is to kind of go back just 2 steps. The reason those bagpipes came to light and were brought to kind of the conversation was that school in Crieff, Scotland, Ardrech, it had just barely gotten connected to the internet. I think that was 2001, maybe 2001. They connected, and if you go over there, this school is awesome. I mean, it
Yeah.
is it is this stone castle of a school, private school. It's been around for, over 100 years. It looks like Hogwarts, to be
Yeah.
honest with you, from Harry Potter fame.
Right. Yeah.
And so, um, this school has a little bagpipe band, and there was a gentleman named Thomas Christie. Thomas had students, children attending, and it's a boarding school. And he encouraged them to learn the pipes. And when the internet was connected, he was interested in helping the students understand how powerful a tool the internet was, and it was going to be for them. He had had some business dealings and such, and knew what the internet could do. And he, in traveling down and visiting at the school, he was familiar with this set of pipes that sat in the school display case. In the school library, there was this massive wall that had this glass display case, and in it, all the good old boys from the school, all the alumni, they would, in their travels all around the empire, they would send back little novelties, little tokens and knickknacks from all over. And that display case essentially became the school, what they'd say, the school museum. There's a mummified bird from Egypt. There's various, crystals from different, parts. There's I'm trying to remember everything that was in there. I think there was a stuffed, snake from India, and various interesting things that dated back to some of that Victorian period when members were traveling to the different parts of the British Empire, and then they'd send back those little knickknacks and tokens, and they'd be dated and have a little tag that said, where they came from and when and what they were. And it was this eclectic collection of items. But in one section, there were these items from with the Great War. And so there was, shell casings or, shell art. There were fragments from, various high explosive artillery rounds that were sitting in this display case. But among all those things, there was this set of pipes. And the pipes had a bag cover and pipe ribbons that were a unique plaid. And Thomas, whose family had also served in the military, he knew that tartan would be unique to a particular regiment. That the regiments had their, whatever plaid or tartan they decided to unite under, that there would be a specific regiment associated with that tartan. And he thought, okay, maybe we can figure out which regiment those pipes belong to based on that tartan. And he was curious because in his experience, he was not familiar with that particular tartan. He couldn't seem to find it connected to any known Scottish regiment in the country. But he knew that there were Scottish regiments abroad in various places in the Commonwealth, be it Australia or Canada. And so here was the opportunity to teach these students how to use the internet. And they started putting out inquiries to various regiments in various countries, asking about this, tartan, kind of describing what they had. And the description was that there were these pipes, and there was a little placard, handwritten, accompanying these bagpipes in the case, that said that they had been found near Courcelette, France, and that they had been picked up after lying, exposed for a couple months. And I want to say it was early 1917. I think it was the spring of 1917. Forgive me for not remembering that detail verbatim.
I'm going to say you're close enough.
But they had been collected by an individual named Edward Yeld Bate. During the war, he was an chaplain, a British Army chaplain, and part of his duty was to help clear the battlefield. So after engagements had taken place, and finally after hostilities had passed to enough of a safe distance, he and some of the stretcher bearers and whatnot, they would come through and they would clean up and inter the dead and try and document who had fallen and where. He had come across these pipes, he had said, that had been laid in the open, and he gathered them up. He was Scottish, and he kept them as that souvenir, as this symbol of home and war and whatnot. He, for whatever reason, decided
what a duty too, though.
Right?
That guy's life must have been hard. What a difficult thing to do.
Right? It just unbelievable what some of those individuals saw and faced, and in his case, that compassion to serve in that capacity as chaplain and have that duty to inter those fallen soldiers.
Yeah.
So he carries these pipes, and when he's released, I think he ended up being invalided home with some hearing loss. He went back to Scotland, went to Crieff, where he returned to the teaching profession. And he was a teacher there at Crieff, and he put those pipes in a display case. And there they sat for what turned out to be about 90 years before Thomas Christie comes along and starts his internet search. Mm-hmm. And so, armed with that information, where the pipes were found, near Courcelette, France, and the year, and that idea that they were picked up in the spring of 1917 after being out in the open for probably a couple months. Those dates and then the tartan connected with Roger Maguire. Roger, as I mentioned, was at the time serving as the pipe major for the Canadian Scottish Regiment in Victoria, British Columbia. Mm-hmm. He recognized the important intersection of date, location, and pipes. Roger perpetuates, that Canadian Scottish Regiment perpetuates the 16th Battalion Canadian Scottish from World War I. He was uniquely positioned to pick up on all that information and know the kind of the history of his pipe band, of his regiment. As pipe major, he was well versed with who the previous pipe majors were. If you ever go to Victoria, there is the regimental headquarters is the Bay Street Armory, and if you walk in there, there is this wall, and there are photographs of all the pipe majors going back to World War I when it originally formed. There were 5 different militias in the area: the 72nd Seaforth Highlanders of Canada. There were some Gordons, and there were again 5 different militias that, when World War I broke out, they combined and kind of amalgamated into one unit. In Canada, they numbered the units, and so those 5 different militias combined, and they were Scottish or Highland regiments. They combined into one that was then known as the 16th Battalion Canadian Scottish Regiment, and they went overseas to of course fight. And Roger knew that James Richardson and a few other pipers, John Park and this regiment, were in the late fall of 1916 fighting in an area near Courcelette, France. And so when that card said that these pipes had been found near Courcelette, he perked up, and suddenly it was like, could it be? Could these pipes have belonged to one of these pipers? Because there were 2 pipers that were killed at what was known as the Battle at Regina Trench.
That's what I was going to ask. Like, do you have an idea about how many pipers would have been in that? Or we've got the intersection of time and place. Then how many pipers are we dealing with as potential owners of this set?
We end up dealing with 2. There was Piper John Park.
Pretty small group, yeah.
Pretty small group. There was the regimental pipe band, and that consisted of multiple individuals. But on that particular day, there were 5 regimental pipers, and 2 were killed and didn't come back, and were lost, and their pipes were lost with them. The other pipers came back and brought their pipes back. So we had 2 individuals that we know that were killed in action that day, and whose pipes were lost to the battlefield. Here was a set of pipes that had been picked up by that chaplain and brought back, and that ended up surviving the war, as it were. So Roger got kind of excited at that prospect. First it was a wonderful thing about history, that here's this tangible symbol and reminder of the war that was unique to his regiment, and potentially, especially based on the tartan. That tartan is really kind of what tied it together for them. Mm-hmm. That tartan is a very rare and obscure tartan. It's called the Lennox tartan. It has a little double white line in it, and it is similar to the Red Scott tartan, Sir Walter Scott, and what the Salt Lake Scots actually wore originally from when our Salt Lake Scots Bagpipe Band here organized back in 1962. Yeah. It decided to unite under that Red Scott tartan, and they wore that up until about 97, 98, when they adopted the current tartan, which is the tartan of the Salt Lake Scots Pipe Band.
Speaking of Bruce, I saw him. I've seen a lot of photos of him in those early days wearing that red tartan.
Yeah. So this Lennox tartan that was on this pipe bag is very similar to that Red Scott, but it's got a double white line in it, and again is rather unique, and so unique that it was ever only used by one regiment.
So
and that was
this is doing us favors and narrowing it down, isn't it?
It really does, and that's why Thomas Christie initially couldn't place it. Yeah. And what led to that internet search in the first place. Mm-hmm. So all of that kind of combined to bring this story to light. So these pipes, Roger gets kind of excited, intrigued. There's an exchange online, and there's sharing of photographs, and it causes a bit of a stir, because if those pipes were bagpipes from the 16th Battalion, which it seemed obvious that they were, then they belonged to one of two people, either John Park or James Richardson. Mm-hmm. And the prospect that they belonged to James Richardson was very exciting, because those pipes would be the most famous bagpipes in Canadian history, because they belonged to the only Canadian piper to earn a Victoria Cross, and again, one of only 3 pipers ever to do so. So there was some significance to explore there, and some reason for excitement.
Of course, so, no disrespect to John Park, of course, right?
No, none whatsoever.
But just as you say, there's just a significant amount of interest in these pipes. Yeah, I got you.
Well, and importantly too is that it helps us remember John Park and what he did, the sacrifice he made that day. So even if they weren't his pipes, these pipes bring to memory his sacrifice, his service, and who he was. Yeah. There's that constant saying or tagline when we talk about World War I, especially from the Commonwealth side of things, and it's that idea that lest we forget. Yeah. Don't forget what these men did. As long as there are those who remember, maybe we won't enter into such a costly conflict again. Yeah. And that's that urge or that request, that haunting message, do not forget, lest we forget. Mm-hmm. And another, if you ever participate in some of those ceremonies in the Commonwealth, whether you're over in France or in Canada or whatnot, here we have, Veterans Day, November 11th. Overseas, it's generally referred to as Remembrance Day. And they have Remembrance Day activities, and everybody wears the poppies, and there's that idea that we need to remember, And there's a poem that talks, and often they'll recite it at these gatherings, and the audience repeats the last line back, and it's that, at the going down of the sun, and in the morning, we will remember them. And after whoever's reading it says, we will remember them, there's that echo from the audience. We will remember them. That pledge, that commitment. And so, the idea that, these pipes may belong to Richardson or John Park, I'm moved to the notion that we're remembering both those men and the sacrifice they made that day when they led the men into battle with those pipes. but certainly, there would be excitement over the idea that these were, Jimmy's. But there was that caution, not knowing whether they were going to be Richardson's pipes or Park's pipes.
Yeah.
And so, the Roger ends up traveling overseas. The regiment kind of comes together, and there's some donations, and he goes over and he investigates, and sure enough confirms that these pipes, were regimental pipes. They're a beautiful old set of ivory Hendersons, and they just were fascinating. And he said, "Yeah, these have to be, either Jimmy's or John's, based on what they had uncovered at that point." And at that juncture, the regiment decided, they wanted to try and acquire these from the school and bring them home. And that's where I start to get involved with this project, and why I rambled on about my father being a filmmaker. I got excited. There was something in me that just a flip that switched, and it was, oh my gosh, here's a story that the broader community needs to know, not just the pipe band community, but the world. And it's an important story to be told. And if I'm going to tell the story, there's one way to do it, and that's through film. And so I went to my dad and said, Father, let me tell you a story. And I started giving him the background on James Richardson and the pipes and this discovery. And, he recognized that, there's potential here. We could do a really cool little documentary on this. And so we grabbed our cameras, and we learned that the pipes were going to be repatriated, that they had been acquired for the province of British Columbia, and the school was going to give those up, and they were going to come home. And that was taking place in 2006. So we made all the...
This is one of the rare occasions of a British museum of any sort being willing to send an item back to its natal land, right?
Right. Well, and I think it's because it was just the private school, and it wasn't so much here, let's hand it over. There was a monetary exchange.
Right. Yep.
Thanks to some generous donors up there in British Columbia. But they did. They were willing to send those home, and that was a real significant moment. And what was really impressive was the way that the province of British Columbia brought those things home. Those pipes came home to a hero's welcome. The steps of the Legislative Assembly building, kind of their Capitol building there in Victoria, the Premier of British Columbia, some other dignitaries, the regiment, everybody came out, descendants from the Richardson family. These things, when they came home to a hero's welcome. They did what James could not. He fell during World War I, and he's interred over there in France. But those pipes came home.
The pipes came home.
Yeah, and they put those in a display case in an honored space. They've been put in the rotunda of the Legislative Assembly Hall up there, and so they occupy a real special place. And it's interesting. We got involved in even at that point they were calling them Richardson's pipes, but they hadn't proven that they were indeed belonged to Jimmy. It was the belief and the assumption, and there were a couple things that they were kind of clinging to, but they wanted to do some further study. And we actually got involved in that process. My father and I, we began that researching and trying to uncover a lot of we ended up uncovering a lot of never before seen photographs that contained Jimmy, that people had, they'd been seen, but people had forgotten. People weren't aware that James was in those images. People were familiar with the story of James because of his action on the battlefield. So they knew what his action was, why he got the Victoria Cross, They knew in his youth he was born in Scotland, immigrated to Canada. His father ended up being the chief of police in Chilliwack. He competed in some Highland Games and won some medals there in Vancouver and Victoria. But he was only there real briefly. They immigrated in 1913. 1914, the war breaks out. He goes over. So
Yeah.
he had one season to kind of compete there and participate in that British Columbia area before, going overseas to war. And then in 1916, October 8th, is the battle in which he takes place, in which he pipes. He turns the tide of battle with the sound of those pipes,
Yeah.
and then loses his life. And that's kind of it. There was one other story where he was involved in the Vancouver area. There's a body of water known as False Creek, and he was working as a electrician's apprentice in a little factory there on the banks of False Creek, and there was a boy that ended up drowning in the creek, and he had run out and jumped in the creek to try and save the boy and pull the boy to shore. So that was kind of the earliest heroic act, the spark or inkling that here was an individual willing to step up and rush to the rescue of another and
Yeah.
put himself in harm's way. And so that was it. That's all people knew about Jimmy. He was born in Scotland, came to Canada, had that one moment where he tried to rescue that boy, and then
off to
goes
war.
overseas, and then really not a lot about him really recorded or shared. Maybe one or two minor incidents, and then the major action where he gets that Victoria Cross, and then that's it. So it was very limited. And so when we set out to make this documentary, we thought, we can maybe make an hour documentary out of all of this. There might be a half hour's worth of material on Jimmy and his background and some of the family, and there's going to be another half hour worth of material on the discovery and the repatriation of these pipes, and talking a little bit about bagpipes and war, and that was going to be it. And we'd submit that to the History Channel, the Discovery Channel, something like that. What we weren't prepared for was what we managed to uncover and learn about this young man, and just incredible things in photographs and letters. We uncovered a cache of over 200 letters that this boy wrote home during the course of the war.
Wow.
And in fact, one of the service postcards that he sent home was dated the night before he went into battle,
Really?
where he would perform that Victoria Cross winning action. Photographs that we ended up uncovering, and it was through those photographs that we were able to finally authenticate those pipes as belonging to James Richardson. We have a few photographs where Jimmy is standing near or included with John Park, and both of them are holding their pipes. And there's some distinct, even though they're quite similar as
Sure, of course.
bagpipes typically are.
Yeah.
One of the differences that really helped define that these were Jimmy's pipes was the chanter. If you look at the sole, there's the ivory sole on these chanters. Jimmy's had a larger opening, the way the sole was affixed to that chanter. John Park had one where the chanter, the opening at the bottom of the sole, was much more narrow, and Jimmy's was much more broad. Again, that's just the diameter, the width of the wood in ivory, what was exposed and what was not. And through that, we're able to, using that photographic evidence, clearly define these as Jimmy's pipes.
Wow.
And so, we helped in that process, which was kind of fun and exciting, for us.
That is exciting.
But,
yeah, that's remarkable.
But in that process, and why I don't have this Unparalleled Valor film, which is the title, we named at least the Richardson film in our Pipes of War project, released yet, is in uncovering all of that material. and getting those letters and starting to learn who Jimmy, was, we realized we had more than an hour's worth of material here.
Yeah.
And if we were going to do this film, we needed to do it right. And we realized we had to expand our project. And that's what we've been in the process of doing. We expanded it so much so that we realized, okay, this is going to be a feature-length documentary.
Yeah.
And in fact, we're going to do this in a groundbreaking way that's going to blend narrative storytelling, the dramatic elements of a major motion picture,
Mm-hmm.
with a documentary, film, because we want to. Anytime you see a movie, everybody goes, "Oh, it's dramatized." There's, that's, Hollywood.
Right.
But
Mm-hmm.
and then when you watch your documentary films, they're just documentaries that go, well, it's educational, it might be interesting, but it's not that emotional, visceral roller coaster ride.
It's a textbook on screen.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we wanted to combine the two in a way that was, more groundbreaking and pushed and elevated the art of storytelling from a documentary perspective and from a narrative film perspective.
Yeah.
Because everybody can see it based on a true story, or this is a true story, and they go, yeah, but you've dramatized it.
Mm-hmm.
We wanted to create a way where we were doing a little bit of both in telling the story, but making sure people knew it was accurate, and reaffirm that these things really did happen and happen
Yeah.
the way that they're being told. And that's because we have Jimmy's writings. We have these never before seen letters and documents from
Yeah. Did you read through all the
that
letters?
experience. Oh yeah,
I've
yeah,
got to imagine that would have been an experience, kind of a deep getting to know a person that it isn't always possible with someone who's lived so long before the one reading. How do you get to know a
Well,
person? That you're seeing their handwriting and hearing their voice, the way that they write.
exactly. You hit the nail on the head. It's funny. Sometimes I get talking about Jimmy, and I've had people tell me, you talk about him as though he were, here, he were
Yeah.
alive, like you knew him like a best friend. And James, I'll tell you, after spending the last, now, pushing a decade, um, researching and coming to know this individual through his own writings, through his descendants, through the history books, through going over. I've been over to France on a couple of occasions now, and I've been to Scotland. I've walked where he walked.
Mm.
I know, in the village where he was born, and raised, the church he attended, and it fell through the skylight. That's a whole, fun story too. He gets locked out of the church. The church service starts. He and his friend were kind of screwing around, and they were late. And his parents were, very strict, staunch Presbyterians, and button up Presbyterians,
Yeah.
and they're seated in the front pews, and he's sitting there with his friend, going, "Oh no, it's already started," and they go, "Well, you open the door." "Well, I'm not going to open the door and get yelled at. You open the door." And they decide to climb up on the roof to look through the skylight to see if, in fact, the service is going. And he ends up leaning too far and crashes through the skylight and falls down and lands between the pews by
Oh
his
no.
family. And
Almost on
yeah,
target.
yeah, almost on target. But we chuckle and say that maybe that's why the family immigrated to Canada, was to get away from the embarrassment.
Yeah.
So it's those kind of delightful anecdotes where you really do start to come to know somebody,
Yeah.
even though
Yeah.
they've passed away. Um, I do. I feel like I've come to know Jimmy in a way that most people don't.
Yeah.
And it's also kind of funny too, because when we started this process, we were the ones seeking information, and we were
Mm.
talking to you know, newspaper reporters that had written articles about James, that had done some research, and we're asking them, well, where did you learn this? Who did you talk to about that? And so we went to the regimental archives, we went to the museum directors, we went to everybody and anybody we possibly could, and then started uncovering, these items in different places, whether
Yeah.
in where some family members might have known some things or had some things that others didn't. It took really getting to know various descendants, and again, regimental people, and even descendants of people in the regiments, people that had served with Jimmy, that had carried down stories, so that after a number of years, as we were making inquiries, we'd talk to people and they go, oh, well, you know what, I know this or that, but really the people you need to talk to, this was asking up in Canada, they're going, well, really, there's a couple guys you probably need to talk to. I think they're based down in the States. They're down in Utah. And pretty soon these guys were
foremost experts.
Exactly. That now people were referring people to us, saying, well, I'm not the expert, but I can tell you who is. And that was kind of an interesting transition to be the guy that suddenly was the foremost authority on.
Well, you've kind of been bringing all these loose ends together, huh?
Exactly. Yeah. And so we tied so much together in his history that we have emerged as the preeminent authority on Piper Richardson and the 16th Battalion Canadian Scottish during World War I. And it's given me interesting opportunities to be approached by individuals. I've done various interviews, and I've worked on some books and articles and things like that for this project. And so that's how this project began, how I first heard about Jimmy, being told by Dennis at pipe lessons when I was a 12, 13-year-old kid, going up till the discovery of those pipes, and then the repatriation, and getting to know Roger McGuire up in Canada and all the principals involved in that, and then the Richardson family, and it just kind of metastasized and grew. And I recognized, okay, we're going to do this film, we're going to do this story on Jimmy, and we're going to do some books and things with it. I'm telling the story of one piper who are in the Victoria Cross, but I went back to my dad and I said, Dad, there are three, that are in the VC.
There are more. He's not the only one.
We need to tell those stories. Yeah. And so we came up with this Pipes of War project, where we're going to tell those three VC stories on film. Mm-hmm. First will be a film called Unparalleled Valor, the story of James Richardson, VC. Then one of the other pipers was Daniel Laidlaw. He was the piper of Luce, the Battle of Luce, around Christmas time.
Okay.
19.
Yeah, I saw the. This is just. I don't want to. Sorry, I shouldn't have cut you off.
No, go ahead. Please.
I seen the website, and so this is bringing back the images of those titles along the bottom of the website.
Sure. So and then the other one is the hero of Dargai, which is George Finlatter, and he that was during the Indian Uprising that took place during the Boer War time frame. And so the late 1800s there, and so those are the three that we'll feature in 3 feature-length documentaries. We have filmed and shot an awful lot of film for Unparalleled Valor. Mm-hmm. All the elements I could tomorrow cut a basic documentary together for it, but as I explained, we really kind of wanted to change the landscape of documentary filmmaking a little bit here, and so we set about trying to get the funds to do that, and we found it to be a little bit more challenging than usual, because one, we were Americans trying to tell the story of a Canadian bagpiper. So American funding was like, well, why not tell an American story?
Isn't that just like us, huh? Why are you talking about them for? Why don't you talk about us?
Yeah. Or then you go up to Canada, and suddenly it's like, well, why are Americans trying to tell our national
Yeah, who the heck
story?
Are you?
Right? So we ran into some of those, and then we were working on getting money out of Scotland. And, James, we came so close on several occasions. But then you had Scotland back during that period really pushing for independence, and some of the people were talking about putting money up for this project ended up dumping it into some of the political campaigns and things up there. And then, of course, even recently, with Brexit and whatnot, we've had just some struggles. And so that's when my father and I, we were approached with this idea to do this America Boxed In film. And it's a work for hire. It was another individual's project he brought to us, and we we decided, okay, we'll take this project on, even though it kind of interrupts what we're doing with the Pipes of War.
Mm-hmm.
And we'll go take care of this film in hopes that the money and the return on it we can parlay into the Pipes of War, and finally get some of the filming on it done that we need done in order to complete that Unparalleled Valor film, at least. So that was the reason for taking on America Boxed In.
Mm-hmm.
We've got that done now. It's in the festival circuit. We're working on a distribution deal. Once that's done, then hopefully we can get everything with the Pipes of War back on track. In the meantime, I've actually been developing a Pipes of War podcast where, yeah, get step into the pipes world here, the piping community on podcasting.
Yeah.
The reason there is that I want to do these at least 3 stories on film and have that kind of that trilogy, and have accompanying books and things like that go along with them. But there were over 1,000 pipers that were either killed or wounded in World War I alone. And there have been pipers in other engagements since. We talk about Bill Millen, the Mad Piper at Normandy. Stormed Sword Beach, with Lord Lovat and across Pegasus Bridge, piping. You have others, from the Boer War period or even before, going back to James Reed and Claude and the other pipers. There's so many stories that could and should be told. There are pipers still out there with various regiments, and though they don't lead men charging into the battlefield, like Richardson and some of those guys did back in World War I, they're still out there today, inspiring the troops. There's that question, why do you pipe, as a soldier? And there's a purpose to the bagpipes. There was a saying once that, the bagpipes are worth 100 guns, because that piper speaks to those soldiers. That sound reminds them of, their home, of their forefathers, of the love they left behind, and it reminds them of the future they hope to shape. It's telling them home is just beyond the next trench. And so those pipers, the esprit de corps they bring to those around them is invaluable. And like I said, one military leader said that a piper is worth 100 guns. He meant it. It had that kind of effect and stirred the men up that way. So there are important stories that I want to tell and that should be remembered, just like we were talking about John Park. And so I intend to and have already begun developing that Pipes of War podcast to tell those individual stories in kind of, whether they're longer or episodic, to cover someone I know is in depth as James Richardson, or there's some that we don't have much information on that would be much shorter, single episode, but important to tell nonetheless. And so
listening to you talk about it, it's exciting to me to imagine, just thinking about like the Richardson story, how what you started with was not nearly the body of resources that you now have, right? It's like in that process of kind of starting to tell the story or diving into it, you kind of find more stuff. It's exciting to me to just imagine the prospect of like, well, what if you do have this tiny piece of information about this one piper in this conflict, and you tell the story in the podcast or in the book or something like that, right? But somebody who listens or reads it goes, hey, you know what? My grandpa was there and he said this, and then someone else says, hey, you know what else? I've got this box of stuff over here, and in it is this, a roll call for a group that went on out in that conflict. Like, who knows how many more things could start accumulating, almost like a magnetic center, and as more things are drawn to it, it gets bigger and more powerful, and so even more things get drawn to it. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And then that's what's exciting to me, because I have experienced that to a certain degree already in doing the research on these other pipers. That, what wonderful things will we uncover, and histories we can tell and preserve and help perpetuate. For me, like I said, being a piper is part of what defines me.
Yeah.
My personal experience, I served an LDS mission. I had come up through the ranks in the pipe band up until and played with them from being 11 years old up until like 18, 19 when I go off on this LDS mission. I come back from my mission thinking, okay, got to get back into school, got to do this, got to do that. Maybe I won't return to the pipe band right away. I'll take care of some of those other things. But then I saw the band perform once without me.
Yeah, I'm sure that did it, huh?
Oh, it was like a kick to the gut, like this knife stabbed right in my back, and it was my own doing that I wasn't back. But I saw them out there without me, and it was like, oh no, that pain was just too excruciating. I no matter what I was going to have to do to juggle pipe band and studies and every other aspect of life, I was hooked. I had to be back in the band. And so I think the very next week I went back to band practice and says, all right, here I am. I've returned.
Like different seasons of life, you sometimes have to step away, but that has been a very common experience that other people have brought up with me as well, that like if you have to skip a season, it hurts.
Yeah.
You hear the band striking up and you're standing on the side, you're not there with them. No, it makes you sick. You got to get back into it.
Yeah, and like I say, that's why it's not just a hobby. It's a lifestyle. It gets in the blood.
Yeah.
And now, for me, every one of my family plays and participates.
You've achieved the dream. What we're all shooting for. You got them all roped in.
Well, interestingly enough, it was because I ended up marrying one of Dennis's daughters, Alana.
That was good planning on your part.
Yeah. Well, it's funny because we were friends growing up, but for her part, it's a friend. It's like a brother. He's one of the band members. In fact, she had promised herself that she and her sisters had a pact that they would not date anybody in the band and they would not marry a piper. They actually wrote a contract because
it seems like maybe that's smart, actually. Yeah, keep things in separate boxes.
Well, right? Well, for them, it's because their parents met through the pipe band as well. Going back clear to Don Baxter and that, when the Salt Lake Scots organized, one of the founding members was Don, but also was Myron O'Connor. Myron had a daughter named Kathleen O'Connor. Kathleen was a Highland dancer in the Salt Lake Scots group early on, the White Heather Dancers, that was part of our organization. And she met a piper named Dennis McMaster when Dennis was just coming into the picture and learning. And that was under, at the time, I want to say it was Bruce Hansen was the pipe major. And so you had the Hansen family, Bruce, and then his son, Doug was a talented drummer, was one of our lead drummers for a lot of years, and then his sons, Jason Hansen, Brandon Hansen, they were all drummers and involved in the pipe band community here. Anyway, Dennis, being just a piper at the time, he and Kathleen met, fell in love, and married, and had 4 daughters. And
they swore they would not do the same.
And they looked at it and go, well, it's because when Dennis did take over as pipe major, all the family vacations were band trips.
Yeah,
were
course.
Competitions.
Yep.
Are we going to Disneyland this year? No, we got to go to Santa Rosa. We got to go to this, that,
Disneyland when there's a pipe competition at Disneyland.
Right. So a lot of their family vacations, a lot of their social outlet was the band or with band members. And so the girls were like, we're going to get out of this. We're going to marry somebody else. We're going to have life beyond pipe band. And it's funny. Every one of those daughters that is married has married somebody through the bagpipe band.
Of course.
For example, Aaron McMaster Gunn married BJ Gunn.
Oh, of course. I didn't realize she was part of the family.
So she was Dennis's oldest daughter. And there they are. And BJ's family, they used to be part of our bagpipe band as well.
Yeah.
Ray Gunn was one of our early drummers. His mother was a tenor drummer, Kathy Gunn, in our group for a while, and his sister Tina was both a Highland dancer and a piper. And so it's kind of funny. The family that pipes together stays together.
Yeah.
And so yeah, long story short, I met Alana. I knew her from when I first started, and it's funny, as we grew up, we had different boyfriends and girlfriends and dated other people, and
Yeah.
we were friends, but and there was a point I had a crush on her, but she kind of blew that off and had her contract with her sisters, and but as we grew up and had a little bit more of life's experiences and heartbreak with other individuals, we come to realize what we were looking for in a companion, and
it was all right there all along.
Yeah, exactly. That sticky, sweet, sappy story. I could tell you the whole love story, and it's kind of fun. But long story short, we got married, and now we've got 3 beautiful children of our own. My oldest daughter, Cora, is a talented piper out there, earning all kinds of medals in her solo career and division. And she was competing in our grade 5 the last couple of years now. She's moved up, and my son Lachlan is a snare drummer, and my youngest daughter, I think she's picking up the tenor to play the tenors, because Alana plays the tenor and the fiddle and things like that. So so a couple pipers and a snare and a couple tenors. We're almost a band.
Yeah, you're gonna be okay. You start getting some grandkids on a bass, you're gonna be all right.
Right. Well, we've got the cousins BJ and Aaron. They have Mari, who's that fiery, talented, world-class Highland dancer, and then you've got her younger brother Callum, who's learning the snare, and he's going to be quite a force on the snare drum as well. So yeah, by the time we get everybody together, we'll have a little band, more or less.
Bring another band into the Utah scene. Just
call it
call it Ian and his backup players, right? Just take it full charge from the front.
Well, no, we got, and I guess you could maybe never have enough bands or too many bands, but we're happy to help perpetuate the Salt Lake Scots, because if you look back at it, Alana's grandfather was one of those founding members with
in a way, it is the family band, isn't it?
And so in a way, it is that family band. It's my children are 4th generation members of the pipe band when they get up to speed and they're voted in. And so there's a legacy there that we want to preserve. This year, 2022, marks 60 years that the Salt Lake Scots have been here in the valley. So it's we kind of feel like it can't die on our watch. We're going to keep this up, keep this going.
Hello, friends. Just a quick note to make you aware, this podcast is something that I love doing, and I will keep doing it no matter what. But if you want to send me money, I won't say a nay. The easiest way to do that is through Patreon. Just go to patreon.com/DroningOnPodcast. We do regular drawings for bagpipey albums, books, sheet music, and more, including Droning On swag. All patrons are in the figurative hat from whence the names of winners are drawn, and there are other benefits to members as well. They're all listed there at patreon.com/DroningOnPodcast. And speaking of swag, another way to support the show is to buy cool stuff from my little online shop, bagpipeswag.com. There you can find Droning On stuff, as well as other pipey and drummy things that my friends and I make. And if you feel so inclined, I genuinely invite you to follow the show on Facebook. It's super fun to have a way to interact over there, to discuss past episodes, and I also like to bounce ideas off of you, my friends, ask you for input on upcoming interviews, that kind of stuff. I'd like to invite you to join in on virtual book clubs and probably lots of other cool stuff that I just haven't even thought of yet as of this recording. It's easy to find. Just get on Facebook and search Droning On Podcast. And if Instagram is more your jam, we're also on there at droning.on.podcast. You can also email the show at thedroningonpodcast@gmail.com. And links to these sites, social media accounts, and more are in the show notes. Leaving the show a positive rating and review helps others to find it, so feel free to do that. And thank you again for listening, you cool human you.
Certainly I could, go on for hours about James Richardson, about his action, tell you what he did that day, why he earned the Victoria Cross. But maybe that's another episode in and of itself, because I've certainly got enough material to do that and talk about why, in my mind, he is just such a hero. it's not just that he performed that action that day, but before he performed that action, um, he had contemplated what it meant to be a piper on the battlefield.
Mm.
He wrote a letter to his mother that I, to this day, I can quote it verbatim. It was written in July of 19, I want to say July 1915, so a little over a year before he would stand and pipe there at Regina Trench. He wrote home to his mother and says, "I haven't heard of a piper playing in the charge yet. And to tell the truth, I don't think there'll ever be such an occurrence. Just picture a piper standing full height, facing, let's see, sorry, I take that back. Just imagine a piper standing full height, playing the pipes, facing machine guns, rifles, bombs, shrapnel. How long would he last?"
Mm.
He goes on to say, the closer you hug the ground, the better it is for you, and the worse it is for the enemy.
Mm-hmm.
Here's a kid that recognized what it meant to stand up in front of, machine gun fire and all the hell that raged across the battlefield.
Yeah.
He knew what it would mean, and that he wouldn't last very long. So when that critical moment came, that morning of October 8th, and he stood, he knew full well that he might not survive,
Yeah.
but he had a duty to perform. For me, that defines hero, right there. And man, it elevates what he did. It was not just a spur of the moment reaction. It was something he had thought about methodically,
Mm-hmm.
and knew full well what it might mean to perform his duty. And what's also really important to know and understand about him is that his regiment, the 16th Battalion, they participated in some real key moments in World War One. He was he was at the very first gas attack. The first time the Germans
Wow.
ever used chlorine gas on the battlefield,
Yeah.
it was against his regiment.
Wow.
It was, he survived that in this attack at Kitchener's Wood. They, and when people think, oh, he was just a piper, well, he was also a stretcher bearer. He was also going in with rifle and bayonet like a regular soldier.
Mm-hmm.
He fought. It was not just, oh, you have band activities and you stay behind the lines.
Mm-hmm.
And so he knew full well what this war was and what it was about, and the horrors that he had to face and deal with. The commanding officer, after that first engagement, oh, by the way, that first gas attack, that was the first major engagement this regiment had faced when they got over there.
What a
So
welcome.
it was
Wow.
baptism by fire, right?
Yeah.
So that commanding officer said, okay, we're not going to put our pipers out and literally charging out in the battlefield with the pipes.
Mm-hmm.
We need every man for the rifle and the bayonet. And so the pipe band was used to march men back and forth from the trenches. It played in the rest areas. It entertained the troops and things like that. And they had that purpose, reveille and whatnot. But they did not go out in the advance with the Canadian Scottish Regiment from like September, the time frame of 1914 through 1915. In fact, we find evidence, and this was stuff we uncovered in our research too, that, and again, I don't mean to keep going on here, but
No.
I have a book. So that original book, The Pipes of War, in it details some actions involving members of the 16th Battalion Pipe Band, where they said they were, played these men into battle. I have one of the early copies of the book. When it was first released, it was released in a deluxe first edition that was limited to like 200 volumes.
Mm.
One of those volumes was given to a major God, I'm trying to remember it's Ray. I'm trying to remember his first name, but last name's Ray. He was Jimmy's over at the company. Jimmy was over in a number of the engagements. In the book, it's his personal copy. He wrote in the front of it. I think it's copy number 71 of the 200. He wrote notes in the margins and where
Like corrections?
Exactly.
Oh, really?
where the book said certain things happened, he would
Yeah.
underline it. He'd say, "Not true."
Oh,
No,
really?
no pipers in this battle. They were with the rifles, or something like that.
Oh,
And then
yeah.
he highlighted the section on Jimmy. He's like, "Yeah, he served under me in my company, this and that." So I have this firsthand account and
You
correction.
have that copy.
I have that copy.
Wow. That is so
Yeah.
cool.
So these are those things that you uncover, and then suddenly you're able to kind of correct history. And I don't fault the authors of that book.
Sure.
Keep in mind, they published that in 1920,
Yeah.
2 years after the war ended.
Mhm.
And it is trying to be an all-inclusive volume, getting information from across the world, from Australia, from Canada, so these guys are publishing this in Scotland, in Glasgow, Scotland. They're getting correspondence from Victoria, British Columbia.
And this, of course,
This
is
isn't
pre-internet. It takes
exactly.
It takes a while to get information back and forth.
Yeah, this is before you're making international phone calls easily. This is a lengthy correspondence, and to be able to, check and edit and vet every detail,
Right, the ability to
and
verify
make sure that
things,
accuracy is there. Yeah, there wasn't the resources available to them that we have
Yeah.
now, and so I don't fault those original authors, but that's been the history and the defining history for a lot of people for looking into this subject matter for a lot of years. And
Yeah.
it's interesting to now be able to kind of correct some inaccuracies. And that was one thing I never intended. So I've actually got a version of that I've been looking to print, and actually was looking to go to print just before COVID broke out, and then the supply chain issues, because some of the best printing was in China at the time.
Speaking of,
Speaking
the
of.
documentary.
Exactly. So, I'm sitting here shaking my head going, God, I had intended to release it actually there in 2020, because 1920 was the first edition.
Oh, yeah.
This was going to be the centennial edition, 100
Yeah.
years later. And in it, I was going to include, I've got a whole kind of addendum at the back that has some of Jimmy's, letters where we talk about some of that history, and I release with it, Colonel Ray's notes here, where I'll even include, his handwritten notes in the margin and everything, so you can see what that was. And it would be the centennial edition of the Pipes of War, which, we've got the rights to publish. And so I've got to get that printed and published, and unfortunately it's not 2021 when all of this went to hit the fan, but maybe here now that we're starting 1920 or 2022, I can get that out and move forward with the Pipes of War podcast and stuff. But I was telling you that because in there we learned that Jimmy wasn't allowed to play over the top of the trench, and that was one thing he wanted to do. He wrote home about it constantly, and so when he writes his mother and says, "I haven't heard of a piper playing in the charge yet," that hasn't happened for him. Now there are other regiments like Daniel Laidlaw at Lewes where they're playing men over the top, and they're playing into action. And so was Jimmy aware? Had he heard about that, and he was just trying to keep things from his mother so that she wouldn't worry so much about him? Probably.
Yeah.
I think he was aware that there were other, pipers playing in action, but his commanding officer had forbidden it because of the experiences that they had had. He asked the night before they went out at Regina Trench, so October of 1916, this kid, and this is documented and reported in the official record, that he asked to be paraded before the commanding officer, and his request was granted. And he came to that officer, and it says, that he implored him with tears in his eyes. Whatever Jimmy felt that night, he was so moved to go before his commanding officer, beg permission to lead the men out into the field with the pipes, And so compelling was his argument that that commanding officer relented. And he said, all right. And for the first time, the Canadian Scottish, the 16th Battalion, they were going to be led into battle by their pipers, one for each company. And that commanding officer said, Jimmy, you're going with me. So this 20-year-old kid, just, barely 20 basically, says, yeah, I'm a piper. I pipe for them, and makes this, impassioned speech. And again, that kind of goes to that idea of that identity that, we're more than just a musician. We are pipers. And he convinced and changed what had been practice and protocol for that regiment for now, a couple of years worth of fighting. He turned it all on a dime that night. And then that next morning, they were tasked with taking Regina Trench, which sat on the reverse of a slope, meaning that it was kind of on the other side of this little rise, and they couldn't really see that target from where they were amassing. But the plan was for the opening bombardment, the artillery, to pummel the German line and their wire entanglements, with the idea that the shells would tear the barbed wire apart, and these pipers would be able to advance and move through that opening and take the enemy position. This was done 4:50 a.m. October. There was a little bit of, snow and rain. They fire, these shells off, and they're blowing things to Kingdom Come out there, and then they advance. The call comes for them to advance, but the pipers were told not to play going forward, that they would receive an order. The commanding officer would tell them when they could start piping. So Jimmy's walking out, and his sergeant major comes over and asks him, why aren't you playing? He says, well, I haven't been told to play yet. And they advance in this charge, and they get up close to the German line. And this is a pretty heavily fortified line. They were hardened German Marines. They were I think it's the 4th Division Ersatz that set in that area. These guys had machine gun nests and emplacements, dugouts. It was not just your little trench in the dirt. This was a fortified position. And so these Canadians, they advance, and as they're getting closer, they start running in. And as they run in, they literally run into the barbed wire. It wasn't cut. The artillery hadn't torn it apart as they had imagined it would. And so men got hung up in the wire, screaming, crying out, and the Germans opened up machine gun fire. And this is, 20 to 40 yards out from the trench. And they just start killing them all. And it looks like everyone's going to be a casualty that day. The men panic. They start diving for cover in the shell holes and laying down in the mud, just trying to avoid getting hit. Jimmy and the commanding officer and the sergeant major end up in a shell hole themselves. And Jimmy hadn't even played yet. None of the pipers had begun playing yet. The commanding officer rises up to assess the situation, and as he does so, he gets hit. And, where he was hit, I don't know. I imagine as he's poking his head up over, it's probably going to be a head wound. Yeah. And it's going to be traumatic. Jimmy's probably, spattered with his commanding officer. When that officer falls, back into the hole, that sergeant major, he, rushes to the aid to assess the condition of that commanding officer, Lecky, and he sees that he's dead. And Jimmy looks down on this scene, and Jimmy, his response is to look at that sergeant major in the eye and ask, will I give him wind? I can't do the Scottish thing. He's like, will I give him wind? That sergeant major looks up at him and realizes what he's asking. Will I strike up the pipes? Will I give him wind? Yeah. He knew his duty was to rally those troops, all these men that are panicked and going to be killed. He's got to turn that tide. And so he looks at that sergeant major and says, will I give him wind? And that sergeant major looks back at him, and his response is, I man, give him wind. So Jimmy steps up to the lip of that shell hole. He strikes up his pipes. He stands full height, facing the enemy, facing the rifles, bombs, shrapnel, etc. And he starts playing and walking back and forth, like he's parading in the old hometown, walking back and forth along the wire. And he's, playing the Rilla Tulloch. The official record says the effect was instantaneous on the men. They responded. They rallied to the piper. They tore the barbed wire down with their bare hands. Jimmy proceeded through the wire with the men. He led them to the German parapets. There he switched to where he began playing Devil in the Kitchen on the German parapet.
Of all the tunes to choose.
Of all the tunes. Yeah. Plays Devil in the Kitchen there. Yeah. The troops are jumping in and starting their attack. He ends up setting his pipes down. He helps bomb some German dugouts.
I've got to imagine that at some point that would be typical to put down the instrument and pick up a weapon.
Yeah, right? So he does that, and he helps clear the trench, and then that sergeant major that said I'm on give him wind, he ended up being the second in command, and once that first commanding officer was killed, he was that commanding officer. Yeah. And his last name is Mackey. So Sergeant Major Mackey, he gets wounded. He catches a round or two in the shoulder,
yeah.
And he's bleeding pretty substantially. Jimmy ends up taking him out and escorting 2 German POWs back. And as he gets near the Canadian line, the stretcher bearers and some of their men come out to take the German prisoners, and they start to administer to Sergeant Major Mackey. And Jimmy says, okay, you take him, I got to go back for my pipes. And Mackey says, no, don't go back. And the stretcher bearers likewise are telling him, no, come. And he says, no, I've left my pipes. I have to go back for my pipes. And Mackey says, we'll wait for you. And the stretcher bearers are like, no, we got to get you back. Mackey later, said, that he refused and he made him stay there, but that he became so sick and with the loss of blood, he eventually kind of fainted.
Sure.
Those stretcher bearers took him back, but the last thing he saw was Jimmy, going back across no man's land again that day to recover his pipes, and that's the last he ever saw of him or anyone ever saw of him. He, his life went out somewhere in that terrible blast of war. He went back for those pipes, not just because they were, his pipes, but we learned from one of his letters that he wanted to buy those pipes from the quartermaster store and send them home. His parents, his dad, loved the bagpipes, loved pipe music. Yeah. They participated in Highland games and all those things. They were Scot through and through, and so his sister was a Highland dancer. And this was a family that loved perpetuating that Highland culture and heritage, especially there in British Columbia. And the hope was that the war would be over soon and Jimmy would be back in time to play for his sister's wedding. And he wasn't. The war rolled on. Well, the hope was he'd be home in time to play for his parents' anniversary. Well, it became clear he wasn't going to be able to do that. But he writes in a letter to his sister, his aunt, who's in Peebles, Scotland, and says, I've got this great idea. He called it a stunt. I've got this great stunt. I'm going to buy, because other pipers had been killed, there were extra sets of pipes in the quartermaster store.
Yeah.
He was going to buy from the army his set of pipes, those ones he played there on the battlefield. Mm-hmm. He was going to send those home to his parents and be like, hey, I wasn't able to be there to play for your anniversary, but here's an anniversary present for you, this set of pipes. And so when he's going back for those pipes, it's because he's got that special purpose for them. And I think it makes it even more poignant that he went to get those, knowing that. Yeah. And then, of course, he gets killed, and those pipes, they sit there in the mud until they're picked up by the army chaplain. Yeah. And it's interesting, when you see those pipes today, there's 2 things missing. The pipes are all intact except for 2 pieces. One is the lower stalk of the bass drone and the blowpipe. If you think about, as a piper, when you carry your pipes, what do you hold on to?
Yeah, sure. You hold on to that stock and you fold the blowpipe up to it, right, or lift the chanter up to it.
Right. So either the chanter or the blowpipe and whatnot, but you're carrying your pipes by that lower portion of that base stock.
Yeah,
That
mine's a
and
different color than the other stocks because of that, because of the sweat from my hand getting on them.
exactly. So here's something that we've postulated: the idea that Jimmy did find those pipes, and when you look at those pipes today, there are there's a what clearly appears to be a bullet round that went through the lower part of the chanter and splintered part
Oh,
of it out. There's shrapnel damage to the bag and to the the tartan. There's shrapnel damage to the ribbons. There's damage and mud all over the drones and in the combing, and there look to be what could be age or even possible blood stain. The thought is maybe Jimmy had those pipes. Maybe he had made it back and he was carrying those pipes by that lower stock. And when the army chaplain, Edward Yeld Bate, came upon Jimmy and had that responsibility to bury him, he simply disassembled the pipes from Jimmy's clutch,
sure.
that his hand might still be holding that lower portion of that base stock, that he simply just disconnected the stocks at the tuning pin joint there and pulled the bag out and disassembled them from around that portion that he was holding.
Yeah.
And that's just one idea. Why are the pipes so intact except for those two pieces?
Right.
And when you think that that's what a piper, where he carries his pipes, utilizing that area, that maybe reverently that chaplain had disassembled those pipes so that that piper could be interred, but he was left clutching that section. And so just a thought, something that we have no way of proving,
Yeah.
but that thought, is, yeah, I kind of like to cling to that he did make it back for those pipes that he wanted to get to so desperately, but in returning, had fallen victim to that battle. And it's interesting having gone over there. If you ever get the chance to go and see the Western Front in France, I say do it. I took my children there this last October. My son, his birthday is October 8th, the same day Jimmy had fought and earned the Victoria Cross. We went there to France for a family holiday this past October, and we happened to go to that battlefield and the cemetery. What they ended up doing after the war was consolidating those battlefield graves. There was a Commonwealth War Graves Commission that was assembled, and they went and they would collect the bodies from, so they disinterred and reinterred bodies into what are now known as Commonwealth War Graves. And they spot and kind of litter the landscape out there, but instead of having individuals buried all over in a field, they pull them into a uniform cemetery. And so Jimmy is buried in Adnac Cemetery. Adnac is Canada spelled backwards. There near Regina Trench. It's literally within, you can see from the cemetery the original spot where he was interred and where he fought and fell, where the trenches were. They're farm fields now. And when you go out to these places, in the farm fields, there are these islands of stone, these little fenced-in areas that are, contain some 2,000 headstones with this great big granite cross of sacrifice and, everything that denotes these Commonwealth War graves, a couple trees planted. But wow, you go and you see these things, and it's a very moving experience.
Yeah.
But have you ever heard of the Iron Harvest?
No. But I can imagine that it would have been a real job to basically start tilling this ground and pulling up a whole lot of metal.
Well, that's precisely what it is, but it's still going on.
Yeah, man.
So here we are over 100 years. This last October, we were there on the 105th anniversary of this battle. The fields had been, were laid fallow. They had recently been tilled again. And this happened the first time I went over back in for the 90th anniversary. So now we're 15 years ago. I think it was the first time I went over. Here we are, even another year. What did I go over? God, yeah, maybe it's pushing that long now.
The
Anyway,
pandemic makes it weird. It's hard to
it
remember how
does
long
make things
it's
weird.
been. Yeah.
But anyway, we're over there for the 105th anniversary, and I tell my kid, or my kids, yeah, go walk across that field and look down. And they went out and they literally collected shrapnel. To this day, those fields yield up, and sometimes they yield up intact, unexploded ordnance, and they have bomb details that have to come through and collect them. Yeah. But every year, as the farmers till their fields, they drag all this shrapnel over to one corner. It seems the ground still yields up shrapnel, bullets, shells, fragments, belt buckles, cap badges. The first time I went over there, I walked across that ground. I stepped outside the cemetery and walked towards where Jimmy had fought. And I, kicked a clod of dirt, and I realized, well, that's not dirt. And I bent down, and it was this piece of iron. And I took another step, and I realized you can't go 2 or 3 steps without kicking a piece of iron. And you look around, and you pick up some of these pieces. The pipe major, Roger McGuire, was with me. We were filming a segment there, and he bent down and he picked up a piece of broken belt buckle, and you were just going, oh my gosh. And it's then that I had this whole kind of paradigm shift. There was this moment of, wow, what must these men have faced?
Yeah.
When 100 years later, you're still picking up shrapnel in the amounts that we were seeing. It had to be unimaginable, the amount of bullets and shrapnel and those bursting shells that shoot out the little steelies everywhere. And you're just going, what these guys had faced, what hell that must have been. And you see that though in those bagpipes. When you go to Victoria and you look at Jimmy's pipes, it's a tangible reminder that that young man who had been this ordinary boy, when he stood up, he became the most extraordinary of heroes, because he faced all of that with nothing more than a set of bagpipes, and he turned the tide of battle. He rallied those troops. They tore that wire down. They went on and they claimed the trench that day. And it wouldn't have happened without him. It was because of that, and taking that sergeant major back out, that he was awarded that highest medal for valor, and fully deserving of it. In my opinion, especially when you go and you walk that ground and you see what that would have been like. Yeah, it changes you. I thought I knew until I stood on that ground, and then you really come to understand what that would have been like. And it's just, it's life changing. It changed for me, and brought to me that deep reverence and respect that I talked about earlier in our conversation, of men and women who fight and fall for our freedom, who stand for those righteous causes and provide us with the safety and security that we enjoy, that our children enjoy here now. Freedom comes with a price, and I think it's important to remember, and remember warrior pipers like James Richardson. So sorry to keep talking and taking this on and giving you more of an editing job as we go here.